Well, in our profession we have this book, it's called the DSM. And the DSM is, full with psychopathology. So I call the DSM the dark side of man. So when you work with your DSM glasses on, you see all kinds of problems, symptoms, disorders. So you see, with your DSM glasses on, you see all kinds of problems. But when you put your DSM glasses off and you put your SF glasses on, you see different things. You will see strengths of the client, you will see successful strategies, you will see exceptions to the problem, you will see very good ideas. So when you talk with your client from the solution-focused mindset, you see different things and you will ask different questions, because also your assumptions are different. Instead of saying the client has lots of deficits and lots of shortcomings, you will say the client has a lot of potential and has a lot of good ideas. Maybe the client doesn't have access to those good ideas immediately when they come to see you. But when you ask the right questions, you help them to access their good ideas. So when you work from the solution-focused mindset, you are helping the clients to access their resources. That's how I see it. It's like you trust on your client's knowledge, and you trust on your client's experiences, and you trust on your client's skills. And you trust on your own assumptions that good ideas are there if you ask the right question. So it is more optimistic than the problem-focused approach. It doesn't mean that you have to be, as a therapist, that you have to be positive all the time. You don't need to. You can lead your conversation from one step behind. But your solution-focused questions are very special. So you tend not to ask details about the problem, but you tend to ask details about what clients want to change in their lives, like what kind of changes they like in their relationship, what kind of changes they like in their workspace, when they go to work, what kind of changes they like in relationship with their children. So you introduce the language of change, and you introduce questions about the preferred situation for the client. So those are different questions. When you operate from the solution-focused mindset, you ask different questions. Usually those questions are not very easy to answer, so the client needs some time to think about it. Very often clients say, "Oh, I don't know what I want differently in my relationship. I haven't thought about it." So in other words, the therapist or counselor helps the client to envision their desired changes. And that's very much a solution-focused conversation, to help the client to envision their desired changes. What would you like your husband to do differently? What would you like your wife to do differently? How would you respond to that? How would you react to that? Those kinds of questions, to envision their preferred relationship or preferred family life or preferred conversations with their boss or with colleagues. When the therapist or counselor forgets to acknowledge certain problems or to show evidence of understanding, then the client will repeat their problems. They will say, "Hey, you didn't hear me. I have a big problem here. Did you hear me?" So it's very important that a therapist or counselor responds to that in a good way, so the client feels understood. So then you establish a platform of mutual understanding. The client feels safe, from there, you can ask your solution-focused questions, and then most often they fit. And the client starts liking those questions because they will talk about possibilities, and they will talk about their dreams, and they will talk about what they like different in their lives. For instance, the client says, I had 2 really bad weeks. I had 2 really bad weeks. And now the counselor or therapist asks, were there any successes recently? So that question doesn't fit. And the client might say, did you hear me? I had 2 really bad weeks. So there was no grounding. So now let's do it again. The client says, I had 2 really bad weeks. And now the counselor says, you had bad weeks. That's not very nice. So he gives evidence of his understanding. I think I understand you. And the client says, yes, I had 2 bad weeks. Now there's a platform of mutual understanding. The client feels understood. And now you can move to your solution-focused question like, were there any small successes during these 2 weeks? Now the client, this question fits better. The therapist doesn't want to be more positive than the client is. He wants to lead the conversation from one step behind and acknowledge the feelings of depression, or acknowledge the anxiety that's there. Everyone does this grounding in daily life. When you have a cup of coffee with your colleague during the break and you have a little chat, then you give some evidence of understanding. That's grounding. So everyone uses it already, and everyone recognizes this grounding principle immediately. In your work, you can be more aware. You can use it more consciously, grounding. So you can videotape or audio tape bits of your conversation with your client, with permission, of course. And then at home or in your office, you can analyze the conversation, micro-analyze your conversation, and just notice if there's evidence of understanding. Is there a good grounding? Are these 3 steps, these three basic steps, are they there in the conversation? First step, client says something to you. Second step, you give evidence of understanding. That could be giving a summary, that could be paraphrasing, it could be giving acknowledgement, it could be parroting, just repeating some words, some keywords that the client has used. So there's different ways to give evidence of understanding, to ground what the client just has said. And then the third step is that the client will say, yes, you understood correctly, or they will say, no, you didn't understand correctly, it's a little bit different, and they will explain to you. And then you have a second chance, and you have a third chance to do some good grounding. When you feel safe, creative thinking is possible, will become possible. When you feel anxious, when you feel unsafe, the limbic system is overactive. Limbic system sends you messages, careful, danger, So when the client feels safe, creative thinking becomes possible. And creative thinking is very important in the solution-focused conversation because all these questions, for instance, would you like to be different in your relationship? You have to think creatively. You have to envision the situation that you would like to get to. So there's a lot of creativity needed in solution-focused conversation. Recently I had a session with a 10-year-old boy and his parents. And one of the problems they presented, that the boy becomes very angry at home, in school, but also when he was playing hockey on the hockey field. He becomes very, very angry. Temper tantrums. He starts shouting at the referee. He was sent off the hockey field many times. He was sent off his classroom many times by his teacher. So this was quite a problem. Very intelligent boy. So if I were to judge this boy, what are you doing? Why do you become so angry all the time? Then when I would judge his behavior, he will feel unsafe and he will start to defend himself, right? And maybe he will start to become angry at me. So the limbic system says, get him. Say something. And so I don't want to do that. So I want to give evidence of understanding. I understand that in some situations, somehow, you become very angry. What skills would you like to learn, when you're playing hockey? What skills would you like to learn when you're in the classroom? So things go more smoothly for you. And you prevent all these problems, you prevent being sent away from the hockey field. What kind of skills? And then the boy feels okay, he feels understood. He doesn't need to fight with me. So his limbic system, to put it very simple, his limbic system tells him, you don't need to fight now, it's okay. Or the prefrontal cortex sends messages to the limbic system, this is okay, this guy is okay. You don't need to fight or flight. And he said to me, I want to learn how not to become angry at all. I never want to become angry at all. So I said to him, do you think it's possible? I don't think it's possible because everyone gets angry now and then. I become angry now and then. Your father, your mother, everyone. So it's like normalizing. And normalizing, he would like to hear this. And then he came up with, okay, not becoming angry is not possible. What about becoming angry in a controlled way? So I said, wow, what a great idea. 10 years old, he said, I want to learn how to become angry in a controlled way. So I asked his parents, do you agree with this skill? Do you agree with your son, what he wants to learn? And they said yes. And the father said, actually, I had the same kind of problem when I was young. And that would have been very useful for me, that skill to become angry in a controlled way. So I asked the father, did you succeed one time to become angry in a controlled way? He said, many times I became much too angry. I broke about 12 tennis rackets. I hit them on the floor. But one time I became angry in a controlled way. And the boy was listening to his father and he was liking this. He was liking this story. He said, one time I went to the referee and I said, my opponent is misbehaving. Either he stops this or I will leave the court. So this was an example of getting angry in a controlled way. So yes, for my son it's a very good skill. So, and then we proceeded to talk about how we can do this. What would be the first small step? And we had a good session. Key concepts, basic information about neuroscience, prefrontal cortex, rational thinking, rational brain, planning, decision making. Limbic system, storehouse of emotions. Amygdala, database for emotional experiences. Limbic system is like a warning system. And when the limbic system is is overactive, in overdrive, the neuroscientists call this amygdala hijack. So the amygdala, they hijack the whole brain, which means that rational thinking is not possible. So the person will do stupid things, destructive things, not always useful things. It's good to know for us as therapists when there are strong emotions, when the client is having strong emotions like anger. I sometimes show, a picture of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and limbic system. And especially when someone has a traumatic experience, after the traumatic experience, there are triggers. So the client will see something, or hear something, or smell something, or taste something, and that's a trigger to activate the memory of this trauma, and amygdala hijack will happen. For instance, military had a trauma with a helicopter in wartime. Then he comes home, he sits in his living room, there's a helicopter coming over his house. He knows, rationally, he knows I'm safe. But still, limbic system says, this is life-threatening, you have to become very anxious, get away from your house, so the limbic system actually is giving the wrong information. So explaining this is also for clients very useful, to recognize the triggers and recognize the whole process of amygdala hijacking and do something different. So in a context of emotional trust, like therapy, counseling, then it's possible to make a plan with the client, which is useful in that kind of situations. Well, as a family therapist, I saw a lot of families, parents with children, and parents, they come to see me because they are worried. They're worried about the behavior of their child, about the school results. They are worried. So when they come in to my practice, they want to express their worries and their problems. And when a child hears this, they don't feel good, because they say, we're talking about everything that I'm doing wrong. So then one day I thought about just drawing two circles, inner circle, outer circle, to interview the family, the parents and the child. In the inner circle, about what's going well, what are you happy about, what are you proud of? When you look at your son or your daughter, what are you proud of? And for the outer circle, what kind of things would you like to change? What are your goals? What kind of things would you like your child to do differently, for instance? And that worked well. It worked well because we made it visual. The client could see, and build on their own answers. And the greatest advantage was that when you start with things that go well, the child also feels good. And the parents also feel good to talk about things that they did well as parents, things that go well in the family. So that was the beginning of the use of the circle technique. And then later it turns out that it works with adolescents, but it also works with adults and couples and teams. Just as an inventory of successes and competencies, things that your team is capable of, things that your group is capable of, things that go well in the inner circle, and ambitions, goals for the outer circle. So it's like a brainstorm, it's like an inventory with your client, whoever it is, to inventory both things that go well, successes, competencies, and goals, ambitions. As a solution-focused therapist or counselor, you like to convert the problems into goals. And that's a skill you can learn. And my mentor in Zuckerberg always said, this is simple but not so easy, to convert problems into a skill. Yeah, for instance, when a parent says, I hate myself for shouting at my children, I hate myself for becoming so angry at my children, punishing them. You don't want to write that down in the outer circle, but you want first to ask the parent, what would you like to do instead? It's a very simple question. What would you like instead of shouting at your children? And then they start to think, because those questions are not easy questions. So your client will need some space, some time to think about it. And then they come up, and you can help them to envision what they like instead of, what they just mentioned, whatever that is. And then they might come up with, I want to respond in a much more calm way. When my child does something that I don't agree with, I want to respond, when I want to speak to them in a calm way. And that you can write down in the inner circle, because now you converted problem, behavior, into a goal. Yeah, so this will take about 20 to 25, 30 minutes to complete the 2 circles. And children might, in the inner circle, children might come up with, I'm good at playing hockey, I'm good at taking care of my pet dog. Adults might come up with, I'm good at organizing things, I'm good at, I'm determined, my persistence is very good. You write that down in the inner circle. So in the inner circle you inventory strengths. In the outer circle, the child might come up with, I want to become angry, I want to learn how to become angry in a controlled way. So you will write down in the outer circle. And adults might come up with, I want to improve the relationship with my daughter. Or I want to respond in a calm way when my children do something that I don't agree with. Something like that. So it's only positively formed goals in the outer circle. You don't, as a therapist or counselor, you don't dive into one theme, but you ask what else. It's an inventory, it's a brainstorm. It's a nice brainstorm, it's fun. And then when you have completed that, you ask your client to pick 1 or 2 goals from the outer circle that they agree with. When you work with families, they have to agree, all of them have to agree. And then you can start scaling question. You start the scaling technique. You can scale that particular goal. So on a scale from 0 to 10, and 10 is, you know how to become angry in a controlled way, you can do it. And 0, the opposite. Where are you at this moment? And then the child might say, I'm at a 5. And you say, wow, 5 already. So sometimes you can do it. Tell me about it. So what's in your 5? Or the adult, 10 is you have a good relationship or a good communication with your 16-year-old daughter. And 0 is the opposite. Where would you say, where are you now? On a scale from 0 to 10, and the parent might say, I'm at 3. And you say, okay, that's good. That's a good beginning. And what's in your 3? And what works already when you communicate with your adolescent. So you will ask questions about the exception. So that's how you can continue after the use of the circle technique, when you have all these nice goals in the outer circle. You can ask the client. You don't need to decide as a counselor or a therapist. You don't need to decide. You simply ask your client, what do you want to start with? And then scaling is one technique that you can use as a follow-up. So then you start to find progress. You ask the client, you're at a 3 now, what would a 4 look like? Can you describe what's the difference between a 3 and a 4? Asking what can you do is not so useful. That's difficult, that's hard for the client. What can you do to make that a 4? So it's more efficient to ask, what can you describe a 4? Because when the client describes the desired situation, then all the good ideas, they will come up, they will show up. And then they will know what to do. I will do my best I will do an attempt to describe constructive language. Because our use of words when we work as a solution-focused therapist or counselor is very important. It's like a tool. Language is like a tool. Like a surgeon has his physical tools to do a surgery, we have our language as a tool, in our work with the client. And constructive language, we distinguish constructive language from problem language. For instance, saying to a client, you have a depressive disorder. It's quite a strong statement, because the client might start to identify, I have a depressive disorder, or I have an attachment disorder, I have a bipolar disorder. So the client starts to identify, and other people will stigmatize, not only helpers but also family and friends. They start to think of that person as, depressive disorder, friend. So in our conversations with the client, we move away from those strong problem definitions. Can I give you an example? A mother and a 16-year-old come in to my office. And the mother says, we have a big problem. My 16-year-old boy has stolen money from me. And that hurts, Mr. Therapist, that hurts. When your boy steals money from you, and he's done it several times. And he lies about it, so he's a thief and a liar. So those are strong words. And that's the language that our client uses in our session. And the mother said, he has never admitted, and I'm 100% sure that he did it, but he has never admitted, so he lies about it. And so it hurts 2 times. First he steals and then he lies. Here he is. So I turned to the boy and I said, it looks like you took away some money from your mother without her permission, without asking her, because somehow you needed this money. And he said, yes. And then the mother said, this is unbelievable. He admits, and now he admits for the first time. And then I turned again to the boy and I said, so I have a suggestion for you. Shall we make a plan how to make it up with your mother, because somehow she feels hurt. So let's make a plan that you make it up with your mother. And also we can make a plan how to handle money, so you don't need to take money anymore, because so you have money enough. And he said, yes, that's okay, let's make these 2 plans. I say yes. So then the mother said, this is unbelievable, so like a miracle. And actually I did something very simple. I reframed her words. Instead of using problem language, I used constructive language, which sounded for the boy milder somehow, milder. So it opened doors for him to admit what he had done. Instead of saying, you are a thief, is that right? I said to him, you took some money without permission. So it gave him a chance, it opened a door for him to say, yes, that's what happened. And from there, we could work solution-focused and make a plan. So that's one example of the use of constructive language. The problem language makes you feel ashamed and will evoke defense mechanisms, will evoke you defending yourself. Because when someone attacks you, when there's an accusation or criticism, then you start to defend yourself. But when it's more the use of more mild language, and not anyone agrees with this, because some people say he is a thief and you have to call him like that. But I don't agree, because it's a therapeutic session, and of course he has stolen the money. It's a serious problem. I will give acknowledgement for that, but still, I want cooperation. I want to, find the cooperation with the young man also. And when I use strong language, he will say, no, I don't want to talk with this guy.